Okay, so this is Donna Cooper. I'm with Public Citizens for Children and Youth in Philadelphia. And I want to thank, first of all, everybody who's been so patient. Sometimes in this modern world of Zoom, you get confounded by Zoom. So we really appreciate Zoom technical support and the great work of Parker Phillips and PACA to work this out this morning, that we're all here together. So thanks everybody for being patient. We have a really exciting time together right now. For the next 90 minutes, we're going to talk about a terrific study that just came out. And just to frame this event today is being hosted by Pre-K for PA, a campaign that I know that you all love and love. And all of our Pre-K for PA partners are here with us today, including the Pennsylvania Association for the Education of Young Children, Fight Crime, Invest in Kids, Mission Readiness, the Pennsylvania Head Start Association, First Up, PCCY, where I work, Trying Together, the statewide United Way of Pennsylvania, and I think that's our partnerships. And so we are so proud to be here today, because when Pennsylvania in the early 2000s began to first invest into pre-K, we relied on studies from other states to really make the case for why we knew pre-K could be a game changer for children. And over these many years, we have still pointed to studies in other states that show the efficacy and long-lasting impact of high quality pre-K for 3 and 4-year-olds. But today, in part because of the generosity of the William Penn Foundation and the great work of the pre-K providers across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we have research findings to share. And I'll just give you the big headline: pre-K works. So that's really important. But don't take it from me, because I'm a child advocate, and it is my job to make sure that I am a cheerleader for even the smallest bit of evidence. But that isn't what we're going to hear about today. We're going to hear about a lot of really, really powerful evidence about what our program in Pennsylvania is producing. We're going to hear from the researchers who created that, who did that study. They're incredible. We're going to hear from Elliot Weinbaum, also an incredible partner in this work. And by the way, we're going to hear from 3 or 4 pre-K providers who have some really pointed questions about the research. And then we're going to hear from you. So as you're listening to what either the researcher presents or anybody else, please think about your questions and go to the Q&A function of your Zoom box and enter them. And as we're talking, we'll be taking those questions and figuring out how to get as many of them answered in this period as possible. So with that, let me first say that we're so proud today that Tracy Campanini, the terrific head of OCTEL, is with us. Tracy, you should wave. Hi, Tracy. Because you know, the Pre-K for PA program is run under the able leadership of OCTEL, and Tracy's been at that helm in a very tough year, to say the least, together with the providers who have really shown their talent and skills in these really tough times. But I'm going to kick this off today with comments from I think that my first comments are going to come today from Elliot Weinbaum. Now, one of the things you should know about Elliot is not only is he the lead support and investor at the William Penn Foundation on early childhood education and been a champion of this, but Elliot, you know, did a federal stint and was a commissioner at the U.S. Department of Education, where he was involved in making sure that what was learned from research got disseminated through the What Works Clearinghouse and other critical research portals that help drive the building of pre-K in Pennsylvania. So Elliot, I'm going to turn this over to you first, and thank you so much for paying for this research.
Thanks, Donna, and thanks. When you say I did a federal stint, at first it's made me a little nervous, but yes, at the U.S. Department of Ed was where I did that stint. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to the Pre-K for PA campaign for hosting this event and bringing us together for this conversation. We are especially grateful to all the early learning educators and staff who took time out of their always busy day to reflect with us on the Pre-K Counts program, so we can help it to give Pennsylvania children their best possible start in life. As Donna said, my name is Elliot Weinbaum, and I am fortunate enough to lead the education program at the William Penn Foundation, where we invest about $35 million a year supporting educational opportunities and improved outcomes for young children, in large part through early learning programs like Pre-K Counts. I should say that Octal has been a real champion for our work over many years and a true partner in the research you're going to hear about today. And so I echo Donna's appreciation of Tracy Campanini joining us today for this conversation, because we all know how important Pre-K Counts is to Pennsylvania families. It is the largest of the preschool programs overseen by Octal, serving more than 25,000 children every year across the state. And for many, it is the only way that families are able to access high quality early learning programs. So your role as Pre-K Counts providers is the reason that Pennsylvania families are able to give their children, high quality education and often go to work to support their families. But even the best programs require periodic assessment and evaluation to see what impact they're having, and particularly where increased efforts or support should be targeted to maximize the benefits of those programs. And so we at William Penn Foundation wanted to help answer some of those important questions and partnered with a research team, as Donna mentioned, to do that. The benefits of an outside evaluator, particularly one who has examined similar programs in other states, is that they can give us an unbiased picture of where the program is particularly strong and where it can improve. And that's where this research team comes in. We're very appreciative to have Dr. Ellen Peisner-Feinberg and her team from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, who worked on this evaluation for the last couple of years and will present it for us today. Ellen has decades of experience studying the impact of early learning programs on children's success and has led similar evaluations of state pre-K programs in Georgia and North Carolina, among many other research projects. But of course, she and her team couldn't have done the research here in pre-K in Pennsylvania if not for the many early learning leaders and educators who participated in interviews and surveys and really helped the researchers understand how Pre-K Counts works in Pennsylvania. Also, a special thanks to Deb Wise and Marnie Ellsworth from Octal for helping this study come to fruition, to my colleague Kelly Brown at William Penn, and to many of you on this call who responded to requests from the research team and from Octal and provided your insights and your information. It is a stronger study because of your participation. So today we want to share some of the findings from the research, the impacts of the program, and how its implementation is moving forward across the state. Again, to help it function even better for children, better for teachers, better for families, and better for the residents of Pennsylvania who fund this program. For those of you who want more information and to dig more deeply, the full reports are available on the UNC website and William Penn Foundation website. We'll make sure the links are sent to you if they haven't been already, but the research is there for you. And as part of the discussion today, as Donna said, we really do want to hear from you, your questions or your insights or your comments based on your role in making Pre-K Counts happen across the state. So don't be afraid, the Q&A box is there down at the bottom, or the chat function. Speak up, type a question, an observation. We're interested in your thoughts. So thank you again for everything you do to support early learning in Pennsylvania, for joining the conversation today. And I'm turning it back to Donna.
Yes. So thank you. You can see we're very fortunate in Pennsylvania that the William Penn Foundation has entrusted Elliot and Kelly in thinking about how to do this terrific work and get us smarter. This is kind of a family conversation. It's a family conversation with over 300 people. So let's establish two norms. If you want a question, use the Q&A. If you have a comment about what you're hearing, use the chat. And that way we'll be able to make this work more efficiently. And I know all of you as pre-K teachers love to have that kind of explicit direction. So Q&A for questions, chat for comments that you want to share. We have, as Elliot said, Ellen Peisner-Feinberg with us. And, you know, it's one thing to say she has a PhD. It's another thing for all of us in the family to recognize that she's a child psychologist, because what's so important in the work that we do together in pre-K is we're developing these young minds. And it's not just about reading, and it's not just about play, and it's not just about social emotional, and it's not just about dexterity and coordination. It's about all of those things. And so it's just so terrific to have somebody with the breadth of experience looking at other states, UNC, North Carolina, Georgia, national, looking at our state. And you'll hear from Ellen about some extremely powerful findings. And you'll also hear from her about areas where we really collectively in this family need to think about things more deeply. So that's the benefit of great research. Ellen, thank you so much for being here today. And we really turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you all for the introduction and for letting me be here. First of all, just want to say I appreciate everyone taking time out of your busy day to be here. As providers, you play such a critical role in the care and education of our young children. And certainly the current pandemic has shown everyone once again how very essential the work of early care and education is and what you do. And I'm just really honored to be here to share an overview of the two studies that we recently completed examining the Pennsylvania Pre-K Counts program, and to also have a chance to hear your thoughts and reactions to this. And so with that, I'm going to move to my PowerPoint. I'm not sure, I'm going to ask for technical assistance here. Do I just need to, do I have the power to choose the share screen here and then?
Ellen, try it. Hit your share screen.
Okay, let's see if that will work, and then go to here. I think that should work. I need to close this and then let's see. Can everyone see my slides?
Not yet. So.
Okay, that did not work. Okay. Sorry, I am not a PowerPoint expert. I'm not a Zoom
You're
expert.
trying to make you host, Ellen. Something's not working.
Okay, all right.
Kate, I wonder who the host is and whether Ellen should send the slides to them.
Oh, the host is Diane. Diane, if you can hear me, please click in the upper right-hand corner and make Ellen the host so she can share her screen.
You
Yes.
are now the host.
Okay, I am now the host. All right. So, can you all see my slides now?
No, did you hit share screen first?
Oh, you know what? I had hit it before, but not, sorry.
Close it and start it again.
One of these days we will all become experts at this. But, okay, let me do it again. Okay. Let's see. Now, let me go here.
There we go.
Nicely done.
Okay.
There we go.
All right.
Probably
Now
on
you can see my screen, and now I need to get to my PowerPoint.
There you go.
Okay, is this working now?
Success.
Okay. All right. So, all right, as I said, back to the beginning. We are going to talk about the results from these two studies that we did on the Pennsylvania Pre-K Counts program. And first, and now my advance is not working. Let's try it this way. Okay. So first of all, as in anything, it takes a village to do studies like this. And I want to just first of all acknowledge, in our case, the amazing partners that it took. Our funders, the William Penn Foundation, our partners in Octal, a team of researchers that we had at the University of North Carolina, a team of data collectors from all across the state of Pennsylvania, and of course, all of the children, families, teachers, administrators, and staff of the Pre-K Counts program and the kindergarten programs that we were in who participated in the study. Okay, first of all, let me give you a little overview of the two studies that we did. We did an impact study where we were interested in looking at the differences in kindergarten skills for children who participated in Pennsylvania Pre-K Counts compared to non-participants, that is children who had no early care and education experience in the 2 years prior to kindergarten. And secondly, we did a complementary study we call the implementation study, where we focused on local variations in implementation related to the program regulations and early learning standards for the Pennsylvania Pre-K Counts program. This study really provided a context for understanding the impact study results, in addition to looking at the implementation of pre-K counts. And we felt that it was important to put these two studies together and understand the results of the two together. And so I'm going to just briefly walk you through a little bit about what we did for each study, what the results were, what the overall implications of the findings are, and then we'll have time for some discussion and questions after that. So first up is the impact study report. So the primary research questions from our impact study were really, first of all, whether children who attended the Pennsylvania Pre-K Counts had higher levels of academic and social skills in kindergarten than children who had no prior preschool experience. Secondly, were kindergarten skills different for children who attended the Pennsylvania Pre-K Counts program for 1 year, that is children who enrolled at age 4, or for those who had attended for 2 years, that is children who enrolled at age 3. And then finally, we were interested in whether there were any differences in the effects of pre-K counts attendance based on various program characteristics. That is, for programs that had higher percentages of 3-year-olds who were served in different regions of the state, or by the level of urbanicity or rurality. Our study sample included kindergarten children. So that is, just to remind you, we were in kindergartens. And just a little side note, the year that we set out to do this study was a recompete year. And that's why we were doing a study in kindergarten and not a study in pre-K counts programs. We had 3 groups in our study, 3 treatment groups for a total of 597 children. One group was the 1-year pre-K counts children, that is children who had enrolled at age 4 in the prior year. Our 2-year pre-K counts children, that is children who had enrolled originally at age 3 prior to kindergarten. And then our no care comparison group. And those are children who'd had no kind of childcare or formal center-based care in the 2 years prior to kindergarten. So it really was a no early care and education comparison group. Just to give you an example of, or show you what our sample looked like, we really were aiming for a representative sample across the state by geographic region and by urban and rural status. And so we did purposely sample from districts across the state in order to obtain a representative sample. In addition to the 597 children, we selected from randomly from 178 classrooms in 51 schools in 28 school districts. Just to let you know, our participation rates were actually pretty high and about what we would typically expect as good or better from most studies like this. We had a 47% agreement rate from families, 89% from children, 76% from schools, and 53% from districts. In terms of the kinds of measures that we used, we were using primarily standardized assessments. We looked at language and literacy skills. We looked at math skills. We looked at executive function, or it's also known as self-regulation skills with children. These were all measures that we gathered, that we did assessments on the children with our trained data collectors within their school settings. And then we actually asked teachers to do ratings of children's social skills and problem behaviors, because that's really something they can do better than we can. With the children who were Spanish speakers in the classrooms, dual language Spanish and English speakers, We gathered data in both English and Spanish. We had intended to do joint analyses in both English and Spanish for these children, but it turned out our sample size was too small to be able to do that. We actually only had 25 children who were, we had Spanish data on. And so we actually weren't able to analyze those data separately because the N was just too small. So now to move to what did we find? What were our results from the impact study? So first of all, the first question was, did we have any differences between children who had attended the Pre-K Counts program and children who had not attended the Pre-K Counts program? Now here I show you these are the means. They're actually broken down by all three groups. The gray bars show you the children who had no early child care and experience. That is our comparison group. And the two blue bars are the children who'd attended Pre-K Counts. The middle bar, or the bright blue bar, is the children who, the 4-year-old group, the ones who'd attended for 1 year, and the dark blue bar is those who'd attended for 2 years, or the 3-year-old group. And these are where we had significant differences for the two groups, the two blue bars together versus the gray bar. And what you can see is we had significant differences for 3 of our major findings: for vocabulary and for our 2 areas of math skills, for problem solving the applied problems and for knowledge of math concepts, or our quantitative concepts measures. And in these cases, the children who'd attended Pre-K Counts were actually performing better in kindergarten than the children who had not had Pre-K Counts experiences. To look at this another way, here's the same data in terms of effect sizes. And this is the difference for children who had any Pre-K Counts, again, versus no childcare experience. And again, you can see that the three middle bars, the language and the math skills, we've got significant differences. The other measures, just to remind you, literacy measures, executive function, and social skills, while some of those look like there are differences there, those were not actually significant, although most of those were going in the direction that you'd like to see. For social skills, it was essentially pretty close to 0. In terms of the other kinds of questions that we were asking with other comparisons or other effects, there were no differences. There were really no differences between the 2 Pre-K Counts groups for those who'd attended for 1 year versus 2 years. And there were no differential effects in terms of the percentage of 3-year-olds who were enrolled in the district, in terms of geographic region, or in terms of urbanicity or rurality. So what were our conclusions overall from this study? Well, first of all, there were meaningful effects here that we found for language and math. These are really key school readiness skills. That's important. That's an important finding. These are important predictors in terms of children's not only school readiness, but in terms of their later learning abilities. The differences we found were important. They were significant. These were increases of 4 to 5 months of learning in terms of the difference between the children who were Pennsylvania Pre-K Counts participants and the children who had not been. These results are also similar in terms of the effect sizes that we found to other studies in the field. So these are really powerful findings. I think it also says something in terms of the idea, this is really something we're looking at broadly in the field of sustaining environments, in terms of what happens for children after they attend pre-K, after, in terms of their next environments in elementary school. So in kindergarten, we found differences in some skills, but we didn't find differences in some of those other areas, right? In terms of literacy skills, executive function skills, social skills. So that tells us something. You know, we need to remember that all children were learning and developing in kindergarten, but we weren't continuing to see that maintenance of the pre-K boost. That is that, you know, difference between the children who went to pre-K counts and didn't for some of these other areas. Is it the case that the early care and education group was catching up to those children, or was learning not being optimized for the children who attended pre-K counts compared to other children? We don't really know the answer to that, but I think that's something that we need to continue to look at as a field. I think it says something then about what we also need to consider in terms of the alignment of instructional practices between pre-K and later grades, as well as areas to consider in terms of professional development, just to make sure that we really are providing the best instruction we can for children. And then finally, the fact that we only found differences in terms of children who were participants in pre-K counts versus children who had not, and we didn't find any differences for enrolling in pre-K counts for 2 years versus 1 year, is something to pay attention to. There are very few studies in our field looking at this issue, and that's why we thought this was really an important contribution. And those that are there, there's some mixed results. Some find some significant effects in terms of children who attend a program for longer, but some find, some mixed differences in terms of what happens next. That's why we actually moved on to our next study, which was this implementation context, to really understand what was happening, what was going on, and what might be some of those explanations. And, particularly we found that looking at things like implementation challenges, looking at differentiation of instruction, you'll see these are some of the things that we found were related to this. So moving on to the next study then was our implementation study. The major questions that we were interested in looking at here were issues around the local variation in the implementation of pre-K counts, program regulations, and standards, looking at the extent to which families are effectively engaged and supported by the program, the extent to which adequate support is provided by the local programs and by OCTEL for continuous quality improvement. And then finally, the extent to which key factors are associated with greater or lesser implementation challenges, as well as any recommended suggestions for improvement. What were the sources for our implementation study? We gathered surveys and interviews from pre-K counts administrators. That was really one of our primary sources of data. We sent surveys to all of our administrators and received surveys back from 87%. We conducted interviews then with a sample of those administrators and sampled them, particularly in terms of looking at region and urbanicity, rurality, to get a representative sample. We did surveys with families, including both a sample of families who were currently in the pre-K counts program, over 3,000 families, as well as we sampled the families who were in our impact study. So that included both families who had been in pre-K counts the year before, so that was our kindergarten families, as well as the comparison group families as well. And then finally, we looked at administrative data from Pelican. Just to give you an idea for our administrators of who those were by the provider groups. So you can see that we had, about almost a third each of Head Start grantees, child care centers, and school districts, and a small percentage of private licensed nurseries represented in our sample. In terms of the study areas that we were looking at, what we did with this study was, again, as I'd mentioned, we were particularly interested in trying to tie our key study areas to the program regulations and learning standards for pre-K counts. And so we looked at 4 major areas: variability in implementation, family engagement, continuous quality improvement, and implementation challenges. And within each of those, looked at specific areas from the program regulations and learning standards that you can see there. In terms of our key results for the variability and implementation, first of all, as you all are probably quite familiar, the Pre-K Counts regulations do allow for some variability based on local need. And we did find that there was variability in some areas, for example, in terms of prioritization factors for enrollment. Between 40 and 65% of our administrators reported that they selected most risk factors in their prioritization strategies. Under 5% indicated that they weighed all the factors the same. A couple of interesting things: about 2/3 prioritized 4-year-olds in their strategies, and a little over 40% prioritized children who resided in their school districts. There was a range of recruitment strategies that were used for selecting the populations that are targeted for recruitment. The majority, for over about 80%, all used things like websites, social media, and flyers, whereas about half used things like online advertisement and various other education programs as sources. There were some harder to reach populations that were consistently difficult, including non-English speaking populations. Only about half of the programs provided materials in English and in Spanish, and few provided them in other languages. And a higher percentage of children who speak this language and speak these various languages in the programs. In terms of areas that showed greater consistency, most all programs enrolled children with disabilities and provided service coordination for these children. Almost all programs used approved curricula and assessment that were aligned with the early learning standards, so there was little variability in these things. Just to give you a couple of quotes from the interviews that I think represent the kinds of things that we were hearing around serving children and enrollment, that the administrator said was, "I think the most successful strategy is word of mouth, especially from currently enrolled families or past families, because families want to hear from people that they're close with." And another administrator said, "We're very rural. And in those communities, we find it's very, I don't want to say closed, but they tend to trust family and friends with the care of their kids. So they're not necessarily out seeking agencies. So we might be missing some pockets of kids." So these are, similar, but some slightly different perspectives that we heard from administrators. In terms of family engagement, the regulations include a family involvement plan and supportive activities. Overall, families perceived the program very positively in terms of satisfaction with staff supportiveness, and kindergarten transition. There were some differences between families who were currently enrolled and those who had formerly been enrolled. But overall, there were no differences in things like family confidence in supporting their children's learning or beliefs about what helps the child be successful in school. There were, families who were currently enrolled felt a little more positively about their relationships with the staff or their level of involvement in the program. In terms of the administrators, they tended to have defined the activities that around family engagement more related to things like communication with the families and collaboration with the families from their perspective, more than from the perspectives of families, more, rather than in terms of the family's roles and the family's voices. And that was something that really stood out in terms of, how family engagement was being defined. Another thing that we looked at in terms of this was transition practices. And one finding that was really strong was that only about 60% of administrators reported that they used the Octal Transition Best Practices rubric and toolkit, although just about everyone reported implementing various types of transition activities. So transition was occurring, but transition activities were occurring. But in terms of the tool that was designed, that was not being quite as widely used, although when people said they used it, they reported that it was, it was useful. In terms of, again, what administrators were telling us about family engagement, again, here's a couple of quotes, and I think the quotes were just very powerful. Success looks different for each family. I can't say overall, oh, if every family is volunteering, that's successful, because that's not reality. We're working with families who might not have had a good school experience as well. So whatever's in their realm and their comfortability level, I would say is successful in my eyes. Another administrator, we define successful family engagement by the family's willingness to come in, work with us, conference with teachers, come in and participate, be an active part of the program, and not just someone who drops the child off and runs away. So those are two somewhat different views, although the second one seemed pretty consistent with a lot of the survey responses we were getting. In terms of continuous quality improvement, or third area, we saw that, one thing was in terms of implementation supports. There were very positive perceptions by pre-K administrators about Octal in their work environment. In terms of the quality of teaching staff, there was some variability in terms of the education and certification levels. One area where there was, that really is an area to, maybe look at is in terms of the mentoring. There were mentoring supports provided, but some variability in terms of the frequency of that. About 20% of programs reported no mentorship, and in about a quarter, the observation and feedback only occurred about 1 to 2 times a year. Another area to look at is in terms of data use. While most types of data are updated and used as required by the pre-K counts regulations, the data systems are really an area to look at. It seems like systems other than Pelican or the child assessment tools were found to be more useful for continuous quality improvement efforts as reported by administrators. Again, these are, I think some really telling quotes, just to know that our questions can be answered, that we have the support, that teachers have our support, we have the support from the state. That's important. And then finally, we heard a lot of these kinds of quotes. We use Pelican because we have to. Laughter. There's a lot of redundancy and the reports aren't as beneficial. And then finally, the last area we looked at was in terms of the implementation challenges. And we gave administrators a survey, and we asked them to report to us on a number of different potential implementation challenges and to rate them from 1, not at all, to 3, a great deal harder. And we considered overall scores of 2 or above to represent a high level of challenges. And you can see that this is what the overall distribution looked like. And about 30% of administrators reported an overall high level of implementation challenges. We found that greater implementation challenges were associated with enrolling higher proportions of 3-year-olds and being community-based provider types as opposed to school district provider types. We found that higher implementation challenges were not associated with geographic region, urbanicity, program size, or the percent of teachers meeting certification standards. So there were no associations there. Another issue that we just found seemed to hold across a number of areas that we were seeing that seems to be an underlying issue, has to do with communication with families in their home language. And I think that's just an important area to pay attention to as well. And then finally, administrators, that I just, just again, to give a little more about that last bullet, that about half the programs, as I said, have children and families who are non-English speakers. And that, and yet there's not always a match there in terms of the language of recruitment materials, the availability of staff, and that affects things like what programs can do in terms of recruitment and enrollment, children's classroom participation, family engagement. And so that's really an area to think about where there might be room for improvement. And then finally, administrators offered, various suggestions for program improvement, but they also expressed a lot of positive perceptions of the program. And just to give examples of a couple of each of those, one example is that, as administrator expressed, it's hard catching up when there are so many different regulations and expectations. That kind of thing is what impacts negatively the programs in the field. It creates confusion. It's like, I know we told you this is what you needed to do for 5 years, but now wait. So I think a lot around, the regulations and expectations. And then finally, another administrator said, I think that it really, really helps a lot of families. I hope that it stays. I just hope that nothing ever happens to this program because it helps so many families so much, academically, socially, in every way, in every domain. I don't know what some people would do if we didn't have this program. And so finally, just to wrap up, we provided 5 recommendations from the research on the implementation study. The first was, which are things that OCTEL is reviewing and considering. The first was to provide greater assistance to the pre-K counts programs with strategies for reaching challenging populations and communicating with families and children in languages other than English, or even Spanish, which they're doing not a bad job. Second is more opportunities, providing more opportunities for deeper family engagement, giving them stronger roles and voices, and enhancing the level of staff support for families. The third is to examine the OCTEL transition tool and evaluate ways to facilitate its use and or whether revisions are needed. The fourth was to provide opportunities to share successful strategies for continuous quality improvement, particularly around things like transition practices, mentoring and other practices for staff retention, and data use and reporting. And then finally, the last was to examine implementation challenges that are specific to community-based providers and those enrolling higher proportions of 3-year-olds. And this is particularly, this last one also ties back to the impact study results and thinking about how to think about ways to also improve outcomes for children. So,
well, Ellen.
Yes, I just put links here, but this probably isn't going to be that helpful to be up to the reports on our website as well.
Well, and we'll send your slides out and this video to everybody that's here today, so they'll be able to get that hyperlink. And thank you so much. What a thorough presentation, and really laid out how you did the work and what you found and what the other questions and recommendations are. Now, one of the very good things is that the study speaks so highly of OCTEL and the support from OCTEL, and Tracy's gonna respond. But before, we had like 4 technical questions that are not sort of global substantive that I wonder if you could quickly tick through. So some folks wanted to know, what were your assessments that you used, particularly on the social, emotional, and literacy? So you might want to we could put them in the chat. That way people would know that. Some folks wanted to know, what did not having pre-K mean? Were these people at home? Were the kids at home? Were they in another childcare program? Also, did you capture income levels for kids not in pre-K? So was there an income differentiation there? And were you able to look at whether any of the children who were in pre-K were disproportionately, or what proportion, had either been in the early intervention program or had some kind of cognitive assessment that would have suggested they were delayed, that might contribute to the findings? And then the last tick off is, Any difference between NAEYC accredited and not NAEYC accredited? Did you track that? And I can remind you those, but if you could give just the quick yes or no's on those, that would be super. So people who are desperate for the technical stuff can get that.
Okay, sure. Do you want me to just start giving answers to those, or?
Yeah, I think for the assessments, let's just put them in the chat. But the
Okay.
other one, yeah.
Okay, I can do that. Those are also in the slides. So if you're, I can, let me add those in a moment to the chat. I'm not sure I can multitask
Don't worry.
and do that while I'm talking.
Yeah.
But sure, I can do that, and those are also in the slides. In terms of the, I'm sorry, I sort of was trying to make notes, and now I'm not sure what I made a note about in terms of the.
Pre-K, were children at home or other childcare programs or what?
So in our no ECE group, they had no early care and education experience prior to kindergarten. And so that included not being in formal childcare, not being in family childcare. We had a whole list of questions that we asked the parents. And so we really tried to get children who'd not had an out-of-home childcare, like a non-parental childcare experience.
Great. And so people could see these definitions in the study, right?
Yes, it is. It is in our
Let's
study.
move on quickly. Let's go on
Yes.
quickly. What about income? Did you track income of the non-pre-K kids?
Yes. So we had. Let me just double check this. So sorry, I have the report right here. So we had. We did. I know. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to double check. We did have a number of different demographic characteristics that we looked at between our two different groups. And we tried to match our groups and make sure that they were similar in terms of our characteristics, or match our three groups, I should say, in terms of these different characteristics. And I'm sorry, I'm just trying to double check that. And we had, in terms of the percent of federal poverty level, we did match that. The no childcare experience group was slightly lower in terms of income level compared to the other groups.
Great. Were you able to track NAEYC versus not NAEYC accredited? Did you do that in your study?
For the
Pre-Ks?
For the pre-K counts programs, no, we did not have that as a variable in our study.
Okay. And then what about any evidence of developmental delays in any of the groups of the children, either as a result of EI or any other assessment?
So we did have a characteristic in terms of whether or not we did have whether or not the child had an IEP. I just don't seem to have that information in here, but we excluded children with any severe disabilities who would not be able to participate in the assessments.
But in terms of the control group and that, like the pre-K, non-pre-K,
We did not, we didn't have any previous information
Good.
about the
All right,
children.
at least get some technical questions. There's some bigger questions people have submitted, but just those technical ones.
Yes, yes.
So at this point, I would love to invite Tracy Campanini to jump in. And then, by the way, we're going to take more questions, but want to give certainly the head of UCDEL a chance to respond.
Thank you, Donna. So I wanted to start out with, as we were planning this event, to really respond to the implementation study. And I just wanted to share a little bit of backstory for me. In 2007 and 2008, when the Pre-K Counts program was funded, that initial $75 million investment serving around 11,000 children, I was at the program level, and I'm sure if many of you were in that initial funded cohort, like this was a jubilant time for us to have this investment in young children coming from the Commonwealth. And it was soon after the funding came out in that initial year and the case was being laid about expansion. I recall coming to meetings and hearing about, well, how do we know it's effective? And so that's been a long-standing question, especially looking at Pennsylvania-specific results. You know, we're very familiar with other national surveys, the Perry Preschool Initiative in Illinois, the Abecedarian Project in North Carolina, the Abbott Schools in New Jersey, but people were really hungry to know whether the investment in Pennsylvania was effective. And so I just want to start this by saying, you know, we're deeply appreciative to the William Penn Foundation and to the Frank Porter Graham Center for entering into this endeavor. When we talk about structuring and looking at evaluation, we typically don't talk about that as being part of the administration's plan internally. And so the fact that we have such strong partners outside of state government that are willing to invest in this is very beneficial. The administration's position has been, as investments are coming into Pennsylvania Pre-K Counts or Head Start Supplemental Assistance Program, that those investments are used to support seats. And so being able to have this initiative be completed and the results being shared help lay the continued strong foundation for those expansions that we really hope will occur over time. So I just couldn't help but transition into this just by recognizing that through the combined efforts of the advocacy groups and perhaps it was even an interest in the results of this study, the governor has prioritized this initial investment moving into next year of an additional $25 million for pre-K counts. And so this is really important as people are coming as new legislators into their positions in Pennsylvania legislature, and they're part of this conversation for continued funding. So Elliot and Kelly, thank you. And Ellen, of course, we appreciate the work that Frank Porter Graham did. So in responding to the implementation study results, I'm just sort of going to run through the questions or the responses from the 5 recommendations that Ellen provided on her last slide. And I want to start with the priority from the first recommendation around strategies to outreach to populations that are challenging to reach or that there are communications barriers. And this is really something that within our office, we're taking a closer look at across all of our early childhood settings that we support and trying to understand what are those key resources that providers in the field really need to use and how can we be supportive in translating those materials. Now, there is a lot of individualization about how programs are implemented for pre-K counts. And so making sure that we sort of have the key bones that's critical for families that are perhaps speaking other languages is going to be an activity that we're willing to get behind. But in addition to those resources, we also want to make sure that we call attention to some of the work that we've done in the past around the preschool development grant in preparing teachers in the classroom and providing opportunities for teachers to enhance their skills, working with families that might be of a different culture or speaking English language learners through the WIDA activities. And so we will continue to look not only at what we can do to support resource deployment, but also to continue to look at how we can prioritize and make those professional development opportunities available for providers out in the field. And I just want to say too, when we talk about developing the workforce, one of the things that's really recommended, and if you didn't know, my background is really from the Head Start world. One of the things that we really encourage is that providers look to employ people that are from the communities that they're serving to the greatest extent possible. And so I did want to call out that some of the work that we're doing around the support of this is with the early childhood PDOs who are really working to advance the workforce through advanced qualifications. And they're prioritizing communities where we can really have an impact with an equity approach. Now I'm going to start to go a little bit faster because I'm limited in my time and we want to get to your questions. But I'll move on to the second recommendation, and that's really about families having a deeper engagement in program activities and to strengthen their roles and voices in the program. And so I want to acknowledge that when we talk about family engagement, this is really a continuum for some providers. And in some cases, when we talk about family engagement, we might not all have the same recognition or definition about what that is. And I think Ellen's comments that she highlighted on the slide were really indicative of that. So I did want to call out that, ideally, as we advance through this process and people strengthen their activities, we want to be supportive of moving to a place where perhaps families are engaged in program decision-making. And one of the ways that we wanted to highlight that we're trying to incorporate that at Ocdel's level is, I'm not sure if many of you realize that there's a pre-K Head Start Advisory Committee that we staff with our Ocdel team and Deb Wise and some folks from the PAK. But we have providers that are serving as member representatives. And that that advisory committee has 2 parent members that are contributing to the discussion around issues and policy decisions that we're making at our office level. So, we want to lead by example and suggest that, in the continuum of successful parent engagement, that's our ultimate outcome as parents, helping guide and make those decisions. If you're not familiar, and again, I sometimes think that Ocdel's team in partnership with EITA and the PAK developed the most tremendous resources, and perhaps not everybody's aware of them. So one of the things that I think helps move programs and staff along that continuum is the Pennsylvania Family Engagement Framework from Birth to College and Career Ready, and the professional development work that we have available to support those initiatives. So I think we can do a little bit better job about how we can levy work that we've already done and offer professional development opportunities to pre-K counts in a different way. One of the really exciting things about this framework is that it also serves as a common foundation because we developed it in partnership with the K-12 system. And that really helps speak to some of the things that we have in terms of priority around transition to kindergarten. And so having a common language and a common framework that we can point to that serves the early learning environment and the K-12 environment just continues to strengthen some of the things that we're trying to achieve with our pre-K counts program. For that third recommendation, really transitioning into transition and the best practice rubric, I am a firm believer in continuous quality improvement at all levels, and it's especially important for us to do that at our office level. So we're going to take this recommendation to heart, and we're going to look at what ways we can take the existing work where there might be revisions that are necessary and repurpose that. So we've dedicated, and this is something we've long held as a priority in our office, significant efforts around transition activities, and are highlighted not only in the toolkit that we have and are committing to look at that, but also in the work that we've done around the kindergarten entry inventory, and also the good work that the team has done around the governor's P3 institutes and how we can make those connections between our early learning providers and the K-12 system as children are moving from our setting to their setting. In that fourth bucket around providing support to local programs and sharing opportunities for transition practices, mentoring, and other things, one of the things that we've done informally, and I attribute this, and I don't know if Ellen has any comments around this, is the success, I believe, of both pre-K counts and supplemental assistance program is the fact that we have the preschool specialists that serve as a liaison between what's happening at the program level and Ocdel. And they're able to serve as both technical assistance and support and monitoring of the program, and then helping providers really identify where those opportunities for improvement are. So we know that the preschool specialists have convened small groups of providers or made connections very informally to support networking, problem solving, trying to connect people around similar issues. But we can actually take this recommendation and start to investigate what those opportunities are for what those opportunities are to do a more formal structured community of practice, specifically around some of the activities that are high priorities for administrators or perhaps teachers, to help address some of those places where they're feeling like they'd like to talk to maybe somebody that's more a senior participant in the program. So we're going to really take that to heart. And the final recommendation in looking at the issues around 3-year-olds versus 4-year-olds, I think we're really still digging into this. And I think there are a couple notable considerations around this. When Ellen was going through her information, school districts serve about 25% of the enrolled children. And we know that from our own data that we review. And so I know that they prioritize 4-year-olds significantly. As the community-based providers are bringing 3s and 4s together, we're wondering about how we can support the field better in the differentiated instruction model, as well as how we promote more individualized activities in those joint classrooms where 3 and 4-year-olds are together. So it's not a commentary on the quality of learning, but just recognizing children that who have been in classrooms for 2 years might need to be challenged more as they're preparing for their kindergarten transition, while teachers are also working with children who are just newly enrolled. And so we're really interested in being able to continue to look at that. So we're appreciative of the recommendations. I think that even beyond the recommendations, there's information for us that's very interesting that we would like to just continue to ruminate over and help guide us as we continue to move forward with the program. So thank you for letting me just respond to that. And Donna, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Yeah, and Tracy, that was such a terrific response. Thank you so much for being so thorough, because people were really interested in like, what's the next step? And you really addressed that. So thank you. But we have a couple providers who we talked to ahead of time, because we wanted to really make sure that the conversation that ensues for the balance of this. And by the way, we're going to run a little bit late because we had to start a little bit late, just to make sure provider questions are answered. And hopefully Tracy and Ellen can remain for maybe an extra 10 minutes. But you know, we asked some providers ahead of time to think about what might be important questions to raise, and they go a little bit deeper into the what's behind the findings. Tracy, you were kind enough to address next steps, but people want to go maybe a little bit deeper behind the findings. So the first person that I want to invite to sort of talk with us today is Kathy Lurch, and Kathy is the director of Why Wonderful Kids program, which is in Lancaster, PA. And Kathy, thanks so much for thinking about this with us.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it to be able to actually ask the question. And it's an interesting question, because Tracy kind of touched base on this already in her last statement from the recommendations. But the impact study noted that the effect of pre-K counts there was no different from the children attending the 1 year versus the 2 years. Findings from the implementation study show that was a little difference in curriculum and instruction based on the age group of the children. Will OCDEL be providing recommendations for improvements to ensure children in the program for the 2 years see a greater benefit?
Can I recommend that, you know, Tracy sort of answered that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
More, but I think it'd be really interesting to hear from Ellen on what would be the sausage in there from her perspective, because Tracy already said, like, we want to do this. So not just from the Pennsylvania study, but from her experience, like, what would be the work there? Is that okay, Trace?
Sure. So I think, you know, what you're saying is, you know, what would be the next steps for the program in terms of what you do in terms of the, you know, the 1 year old, not 1 year olds versus 2, the 1 year attendees versus 2 year attendees. And I think that's actually a two-pronged answer, because I think it's not just what pre-K counts does, but I also think it's what the school districts do. And I think in other work I'm doing, that's really what we're looking at is, it's not just what's happening in pre-K, but it's what's happening after pre-K. And I think that's some of what I was trying to get at in terms of my conclusions from the impact study around the idea of sustaining environments, is that we can't just look at what's happening in pre-K, but we have to look at what's happening after pre-K to continue to support what's happening for children. So I think there's two pieces. I think one is to think about how you're structuring children's pre-K experiences. And I think one thing we saw perhaps with pre-K counts it's a challenge in your pre-K programs is you have a lot of mixed stage classrooms, and we all know that's hard, right? That's hard for teachers. That's hard in terms of instructions, that's hard to figure out how to gear that. I think there's also logistical issues to figure out how to do that or not, how to figure out how not to do that also with your program. So I think, that's just something to look at broadly as a program, to think about how to structure that in a way to make it feasible from a financial perspective, from a logistical perspective for the program. Those are all realities in terms of providing a fully scaled program like this. And I applaud Pennsylvania for doing this. Not very many state pre-K programs offer 3-year-old pre-K. So, right there, you get a lot of points for trying to do that. So that's great. I mean, that's amazing. But I think in doing that, the challenges are, the realities are for teachers in the classroom when you've got to, provide instruction to both 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. And some of those 4-year-olds have been there for 2 years, and some of those 4-year-olds have been there for 1 year. And then you've also got 3-year-olds, and now you've got children at a huge range of developmental levels and with a huge range of knowledge and experience in your classroom. That's that much more of a challenge for teachers than even if you've got just 1 year of children who still are going to be at a range of developmental levels no matter what. So I think that's the reality for pre-K counts to think about. Then I think you've got transition, and clearly you're doing a lot in terms of transition activities, but there were some areas to think about where more could be done as well. And I think particularly around the collaboration between, and again, this is nothing unique to Pennsylvania. I'll just say that, like your challenges are the same as every other place in this country. Every state goes through this, every, school district goes through this, but, the challenges between pre-K and kindergarten, because this is the reality of our country, that pre-K is one system, but it's not even one system. It's a whole bunch of different systems. And then you've got the elementary school system, which is another system, and they're not very connected. And even when you have pre-K programs in school districts, they're often still not even very connected to the kindergarten programs in those school districts, right? And so I think figuring out, how to enhance that level of collaboration, as well as, and I'll just put in another plug here, one thing that, again, this pertains to some of the family engagement pieces. And I know this isn't what you were asking about, but it just sort of struck me with the transition piece too, that it's another place to bring families in more as well. So I'll just put that out in terms of, helping parents be better advocates for their children.
That's super helpful. And, really, Kathy, you kicked us off with the deepest question, and Ellen gave us the deepest amount of work, because that pipeline really has to communicate and work, and it includes not just the faculty of the school districts and the early childhood programs, but the parents. So Tracy, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Well, I don't know if people always understand why we've afforded the flexibility for 3 and 4-year-olds. And I just add that in various roles supporting pre-K counts, I've continued to advocate for that flexibility to allow local communities to prioritize how they're enrolling children that sort of meets their community needs. And so much of Pennsylvania is rural in nature. And when we talk about the funding that comes out associated with pre-K counts, there are some of our providers that might not be able to operate if they had to exclusively prioritize 4-year-olds. And so from our perspective, how a grantee arrays children and structures children within their program, we really want that to be a local decision. But from my perspective, I felt like that was important flexibility to offer to make sure that grantees were viable in those really rural communities.
Well, thanks for speaking up for those small towns. It does raise still, though, whether it is about the viability financially. I think, Ellen, you talked about that. How do you make it work, but it also works at the curricular level and the instruction level? And that's probably our next evolution. So thank you, Kathy. I'm going to ask Marianne Devlin to, she has a question for us, also another provider. And by the way, Marianne Devlin is the director of the Child Development Incorporated in New Philadelphia, PA, which has nothing to do with the Philly I'm from, but we are sisters in spirit. So, hey, Marianne, please ask your question.
Sure. My question, I think Tracy did a pretty good job at answering in her response as well. And it's about what does assistance look like for programs in reaching those more vulnerable targeted populations, dual language families. So I think you addressed it.
Could I build off of your question, Marianne, and
Sure.
ask Ellen, are there strategies you've seen in other states and or nationally that you think we should think about based on your acknowledgement of our knowledge of our program that would help us with families who have languages other than, as you point out, even Spanish?
Well, I mean, I'm fortunate. My roots are the same as Tracy's in Head Start, and I'm very fortunate as well to have pre-K counts funding, Head Start funding, and childcare funding. So, and the flexibility that Tracy mentioned in terms of priority of children in a very rural county. We're in Schuylkill County. So, all of that works, and we as in our program, approach recruitment as one program. And that's how we're able to reach as many at-risk families as we do, because the Head Start, 100% of the federal poverty guidelines go into the Head Start slots. Pre-K counts was a blessing for families in this community because it was the 101 to the 300%. And then we prioritized for the families most in need in terms of income. But we couldn't do it if we didn't have 3- and 4-year-olds together. And our experience of having the mixed group has been wonderful. But we use a variety of strategies in a rural community. But I think in your presentation, Ellen, that might have been my quote about word of mouth in a small communities. Families learn to trust you, and they tell other families about it, that it's okay. And so that, networking, I think, is a great opportunity with other programs to find out what they do and what works for them. I love the idea of the new ELRCs in the state and the fact that they're serving as a resource and referral for all programs and not just subsidized childcare. So I think those are, all things that our program has benefited from, and just, having the diverse funding to be able to meet the various needs of children and families. I think community partnerships are really essential. Referrals from those communities.
I think you've given us a lot of good tips. I want to sort of also see whether from other parts of the country, Ellen has anything she wants to add. Is that okay, Marianne?
Sure.
Okay, great. Ellen, do you have any thoughts in that regard?
Yeah, so one thing I'll say, thank you, Marianne. Thank you for sharing that. I shared your quote. I think what that illustrates is, again, sort of where, some of where that recommendation came from is that, one thing we've seen is that the answers to these are not one size fits all, and how the value of what we've seen is it's so valuable for programs to get together. What we hear time and time again is how it's so useful. They get so few opportunities to get together, to learn from one another, to network with one another. Of course, we're all doing that in different ways nowadays than we used to, right? But, to really, different programs try different strategies and find different things that work, and even what works for one may not work for another, may not work in the same way, more rural or more urban, different parts of the country, different communities. Different things may work, but then again, what works for some, they may learn something valuable and try different things, and teachers have different ideas sharing with one another. And so that's really a useful strategy. And so where you can create things like these, communities of practice or professional learning communities, those are really, really useful strategies to try. I think, that's, probably one of the strongest recommendations I could offer is that, learning from one another, it is amazing what different programs have learned and tried and shared. And that's just incredibly strong.
Great. So we're going to learn from another provider here. I'm so excited that somebody who has been very active with our work, Shyla Mitchell, is the executive director of Bright Futures Learning Center located in Harrisburg. And, the Pre-K for PA campaign can always count on Shyla to be there for us. And she also wanted to ask a question about the study. So hi, Shyla.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. So my question is in regards to recommendation number 2. On the implementation summary, it calls for deeper engagement of parents. What exactly does that look like? Is it similar to some of the supports that Head Start provides with family engagement coordinators and their parent advocacy staff? And then what would be the additional staff support that was mentioned?
And Shyla, is it okay, should Ellen answer this and with her experience, or Tracy, would you like to take this?
I mean, I can start, and if Ellen would like to weigh in, as I mentioned, I feel that programs are different places along a continuum of family engagement. So, ultimately what would be ideal is we developed a system where providers and grantees were moving more towards that end of the continuum where parents had an active role, not only in volunteering in the program and being engaged in conversations about their own child's development, but how they can give reflective input into the direction that the program might be going and assist in what we call program governance. And that is really at the high end of the continuum. And so from my perspective, as we look at all of those different ways that families can be meaningfully engaged, and I might add, really sets them up to help support their child as they move into the K-12 system, that would be the ideal. So we have the family engagement framework and some professional development around that from our perspective. Our team can look at ways that we could build on that. But Ellen, if you have comments from other states that you've observed, please share them.
So I would add, I think I 100% agree with what both of you said. I think, Shyla, I think Head Start is a great example of doing that. Tracy, I completely agree with the examples that you gave. I think the other piece I would add to that is to make sure that parents are engaged in asking them what they want and what they're looking for and what's helpful to them. Again, one thing that, I was really struck by in these results is just making sure that the parent engagement and that the approach to family engagement is making sure that these are things that are engaging families in ways that they see as valuable and useful and helpful in the ways they want to be engaged, and not the ways that the programs think that the families need to be engaged.
Thank you. So for everybody who's on, it's 3:27. We did start late, so we're going to go a few more minutes if that's okay. We have another provider with us who has a question, and then there's several that came in the chat. So we're going to try and get through these in the next 10 minutes. Delilah Brennan is here from this Philadelphia, and she's the founder and operator of Destiny's Children Early Learning Academy. And welcome, Delilah. And the floor is yours with your question.
Hey, excuse me, my camera is a little broken, so you gotta excuse me. My question is based on implementation recommendation number 4. Furthering support to local programs and opportunities for sharing successful approaches around transition practices. Are there successful models of this that are worthy of replicating across the state?
So yeah, any thoughts on that, Tracy or Ellen? Anything you saw in the research, or Tracy across the state, like a particular good transition model?
So I'll jump in and just defer. We can definitely follow up on this because I think we have really good examples that the OCDEL team is aware of. I'm just not prepared to speak with them, but I think that's a great idea to sort of share successful models as resources for other people to think about. So I'm going to defer to Ellen about some things that she might have seen, but we'll commit to, as our team's working on following up.
Yeah, so the way we approached the transition was really, we were asking what people were doing, and we were trying to understand the types of activities that programs were engaged in and the frequency of activities, as far as what's actually happening in terms of particular models that people might be implementing. We didn't get into that level of detail within Pennsylvania, so I'm not sure I can exactly answer that question.
Well, we sort of thought this might come up. And so we took the liberty of asking Emily Neff from Trying Together to come on. And Emily, we do have some questions to follow on, but maybe you could help answer Delilah's question about the models that you're familiar with.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Donna. And thanks Ellen and Tracy and Delilah for the question. So I wanted to share just a little bit about the High Five Initiative in Allegheny County. And Ellen, you spoke about learning from one another. And I think this is a really great example of how school districts are learning from each other, as well as really emphasizing the partnership that we need to make with early learning programs so that they can be learning with us and all together. So High Five is an initiative in Trying Together leads that in partnership with the Allegheny Intermediate Unit and the United Way of Southwest PA, who is our funder. And it was originally established to support on-time kindergarten registration, but I think what I can speak to that's really replicable around this is the collaboration and networking that occurs across our county. High Five has really created an opportunity for a professional learning community within our region for pre-K teachers, kindergarten teachers, early childhood program directors, and school principals. And we come together twice a year at what we call our roundtables. And this is really an opportunity for programs to share best practices and strategies of what is working in terms of transition. We have districts do transition plans, which align with the 4 connections outlined in the OCDEL best practices. And I think something that we've really tried to focus on is that partnership between pre-K programs and elementary schools. That connection we know is so important in supporting children as they enter kindergarten and sustaining what they've learned in pre-K classrooms. And, I think it's just we've learned so much from doing this. We have MOUs between districts and the county Head Start pre-K counts that are locally signed by the AIU, which also meets, federal Title I requirements for the district. So we've really tried to leverage that as well in creating those partnerships. And with COVID and that impact, we've still been able to host roundtables. So we've hosted 2 virtual roundtables. We had one on Monday. And it's people coming together and really problem solving around registration, around transition practices, around family engagement, which was our focus this week. And we were able to partner beyond Allegheny County, thanks to the United Way as well, with districts that they work with in Westmoreland and Fayette and Greene. So we had a really regional approach to share best practices. So it's definitely something that we're all really excited to talk about, and we're always willing to share. And I really think that the collaborative model and the sharing of best practices, I think, is something that could be replicable. So thanks, Donna, for allowing me to share.
Emily, that totally echoes what Ellen talked about. So I think you're totally in line with the research. What would be really interesting to have you send around after this is the degree to which that transition planning affects the curricula of the early childhood programs. And that pipeline alignment would be really, really wonderful. So that's the next step.
Yeah, absolutely. I will share a little bit of information in the chat. Oh, and I can also say that we really promote early learning continuum for the districts as well, and promote that, they're talking to those pre-K teachers and involving them on their transition team.
Cool. Well, another way in which Allegheny County is a model for Pennsylvania. So thank you. So listen, we got a couple other really pointed questions that I want to ask Ellen to address. One provider said, it surprised me that the study did not find significant benefits in the areas of executive function and social skills. Do you have any thoughts on why this might be the case?
Sure. Okay. So I think two things. I think in terms of the executive function skills, I think those are a little bit harder to see differences at this age, and particularly with some of the measures we have, although we did try to particularly pick measures that we thought were more age appropriate for this young group. But I think those are skills that you often don't see as much change in these younger ages. And so that could be some of the explanation for why we didn't
then
see.
the expectations of change wouldn't be very large anyhow.
Right. In terms of the social skills, what I've seen in the research, I'll just, disclosure here, I've been a researcher in the field for 30 years, for a long time. So I've been doing this kind of work for a very long time. And so what I've seen with social skills is that there's a lot of, these are teacher ratings, keep in mind. So that's a different kind of measure than our other measures, which were administered by our trained assessors. And so there is a piece where there's the teacher expectation that's built into that. And particularly, we gathered these data between the middle and the end of kindergarten, sort of in the second half of the kindergarten year. And so there is some teacher expectation in terms of children's skills at that point. And so I think there's some of that factored in, and those measures just, in most of our studies, we just don't tend to see as much difference on that measure either as we do on the other kinds of measures. And I'm sure some of that, it's not that these skills aren't as important, both in terms of executive function and social skills, but I just think some of it's a measurement issue.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you so much. It's very enlightening. One last question, and then Trace, we have one more for you. Ellen, in your research, did you notice a difference between the implementation challenges that community partner providers encountered versus school districts?
That's a good question. So, we'd have to go back and look at that. We didn't actually then break down the challenges by the different groups. Our numbers start getting pretty small at that point because we only had surveys from 189 administrators. And then you start breaking that down by the different groups, so you would start getting not a whole lot. And so what we were interested in looking at was those who had high challenges and those who had low challenges. And so about 30% of our sample were in the high challenges group overall.
But not broken down by community versus school?
And so we did look at that as a variable, but then we didn't look at the specific items within that. We could go back and look at that. I mean, I can tell you overall the kinds of things that were, the highest rated, kinds of items, but in terms of whether the highest rated, whether those things then varied by, you start getting into really small numbers that you can't have as much confidence in.
Well, if you wouldn't mind, it came in from a provider. It'd be really interesting to know if there is any data at that level that you could have confidence in. Please share it. Before we sign off, Tracy, people have been really compelled by the information here on the progress of children in pre-K. And this sort of $1 million question is, anybody looking at anything as it relates to progress during virtual learning, and what would be done going forward to continue to track this kind of progress in general?
So I am not aware that we're doing anything looking at children's progress in virtual learning. And I do have to say, there's a lot of concern that in this space, we're not having the same impact for children in their participation. And we're also seeing impacts because families have so many conflicting and competing priorities right now that they can't engage necessarily in the same way, even in the virtual environment space. So we'll come back around in case I'm not quite informed correctly on that, if the team has anything to follow up and share that with folks. But one of the things I wanted to say before we leave is evaluation is really important. And so I know that there's been some questions about whether we would continue to have evaluation. As I mentioned, when I started, we've depended on the generosity of external partners to be able to do that. And I think evaluation is critical. I really am cautious, though, as we talk about how evaluation is structured, that we're really structuring any potential future evaluations very closely, and that we're not attributing outcomes or challenges to pre-K counts that might not necessarily be pre-K counts' responsibility. And so a lot of people say, are we going to do a longitudinal study? And there's a lot of complexities that raise concerns as we start to look at how children are continuing to progress through the other ages. So while I'm committed to what evaluation might be able to tell us, I just want to make sure that we do it right. And so future conversations might be available, but we would really want to have that attention and expert advice guiding us if we did anything along those lines.
Yeah, just to put a pin on that point, it really depends on how well the K-1, 2, 3 programs take the benefits of early learning and build on them. And that's a variable that is not consistent across the 500 school districts. So thank you for raising that point. Listen, let me just say for the Pennsylvanians on our call today, Tracy said at the top of the call that the governor proposed a $25 million increase in pre-K and a $5 million increase in Head Start. And Emily's study shows that this investment matters. So while you got a lot of great information today, I want to ask you on behalf of the Pre-K for PA campaign, number one, if you're not already on our newsletters, please sign up with Pre-K for PA so you can get our alerts, so you can help make sure that money becomes a reality. And number two, if you are part of the Pre-K for PA campaign and have not yet reached out to your state senator or your state representative, to encourage them to, at a minimum, in the budget negotiations, have the governor's investment in pre-K and Head Start as a starting point. That is very, very, very important, especially as we try to repair the learning loss of the children for the years ahead. So I want to thank on behalf of my Pre-K for PA partners. And by the way, I failed to mention at the top of this that Pennsylvania Partnership for Children, Carrie King, a founding member of the Pre-K for PA campaign, was one of our partners. So I apologize, Carrie. So glad that you are our partner. And thanks to all the partners who put this together. Lots of folks asked questions that were technical, and we're going to send them to Ellen. And we will send out the recording and the study soon after this. It'll take a little while for the recording to download. So just be patient. You will get an email. Thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you very much, Elliot, for making it possible for Ellen to teach us so much. Have a good afternoon, folks.